Welcome to Indigenous Earth, where we explore indigenous wisdom to help you protect and connect to our planet. From the Paitavdira tribe of Paraguay, I'm your host, Frank Oscar Weaver. Have you ever wondered how you can put indigenous knowledge into your daily lives? You just don't know where to start? This episode is for you. We're going to be talking to Professor Sue, one of the most popular guests we ever had on the podcast. In her story of fighting pollution and chemicals in the water, and how we can bring traditional knowledge and also Western science into our daily lives, this is a great episode that you have to get your notepad ready, because there's a lot of information in this one that is going to be very practical and very interesting. Good morning, Sue. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
Good. Thank you so much for being back on the podcast. I got to say that your episode was one of the most popular ones. So I'm really excited to have you back.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, and tell us, for those that haven't heard the first episode that you were on the podcast, can you tell us a little bit more about where you are right now?
Yeah, so I'm going to start with my language. So, bonjour, kinawaya, so Chiblow dishnikas, okama anagintiko, chichak dodam, ketiganzi bing danjiba, Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, and Dao, ketiganzi bing in. So my name is Sue Chiblow. I am from Garden River First Nation, where I also live. And I am Crane Clan, and I am Ojibwe, Anishinaabe from the Great Lakes Territory.
That's an amazing. And how far are you from like the Michigan area?
I live along the St. Mary's River. I look across the river, and Michigan is right there. It's a long stone throw away.
Yeah, I've been to that part of the country, so
Okay.
it's pretty beautiful there. I love the lakes. And what have you been up to since the last time we spoke?
I'm an assistant professor at the University of Guelph, and I'm also a commissioner to the International Joint Commission. So I was appointed as a commissioner by Canada. There's 6 commissioners in total, 3 appointed from Canada and 3 from the United States. And the International Joint Commission was created back in 1912 because of a 1909 treaty between Canada and the U.S. It's called the Boundary Water Treaty. So it deals with conflict along the entire border from the west coast to the east coast, with all the shared waters that we have, not just the Great Lakes, but all the way across. And so I've been appointed a commissioner, and I'm still doing my professor position. In my professor position, I have been awarded with 2 other professors a huge grant that we're going to be working on, and this is transforming chemical management with Indigenous expertise, which is amazing. It's going to be so much fun and so exciting to begin this work.
Yeah, congratulations on joining that commission and on getting this grant. And you mentioned that is like chemicals.
In the territory that I live, I work with the elders that I work with. Their primary goal is to stop the use of herbicide spraying in forestry operations. And in that herbicide, one of the main chemicals that is really harmful is called glyphosate. So glyphosate attacks broadleaf plants, so it'll kill birch trees, maple trees, oak trees, anything like that. And then after they've come in and done the harvesting and taken all of the trees, then they come in and they spray that stuff so nothing else will come up. And then they come in and plant jack pines, which are an evergreen, but they create plantations because of that glyphosate. And the elders are saying that this chemical is hurting more than just the plants. It's traveling around, and it's hurting a lot of the animals and the birds and the bees. So they want this to be banned in Ontario, and Quebec banned it years ago. So they want it banned in Ontario. So that's part of why this whole chemical grant that I'm on. But it's a really complicated system, of course. In Canada, Health Canada and the PMRI are the ones that allow the chemicals into the country. And they work with Environment Canada Climate Change. And then after it's allowed into the country, then the provinces get a hold of the chemicals and do what they do with it. So it's a complicated process to figure out how to ban this. And many other countries have already banned glyphosate in their countries. So the elders are pushing for this to happen in Ontario. And there's a campaign called Stop the Spray Ontario, but there's also a campaign called Stop the Spray BC and Stop the Spray New Brunswick. So there's different areas in Canada that all want this stopped. And with chemical management currently right now, there's absolutely no Indigenous expertise sitting at the table helping them decide what chemicals come into the country and how these chemicals react with other chemicals.
That's such important work that you're doing, and I think I heard of that chemical before that has a very problematic even for humans, right? That they can affect humans, and I am so glad that you're bringing that Indigenous knowledge into this conversation. That is so important because everything is related. If you're killing one weed, but what is eats normally that weed, is that bunny, and then who is the bunny? It just goes across the board, the contamination, And I know that you're very passionate about water protection. Are you doing anything else related to that work?
Yes. So I have, I work with a PhD student, but I'm going to be bringing on a couple other students, and we're setting up water monitoring programs. I also work with a nonprofit organization called Water First, and they do water monitoring. They help set up water monitoring in communities. But one of the important things that we want to work on is to start to determine what are our indicators on when the water is healthy, and then how does that connect to our health? And when we say our health as Anishinaabe people, and most Indigenous peoples, I believe, use the same lines of thinking. When we talk about our health, we're talking about our physical, our emotional, our mental, and our spiritual. And that's all one. It's not compartmentalized and separated out and put into different little towers. It's all connected, like how you had mentioned about what people refer to as a weed. But so what we want to do is look at what are the indicators for our well-being in connection to the water. So when the waters are contaminated and I can't approach the waters to do ceremony, how does that affect me? How does that affect my health? Not just my mental, but also my spiritual and my physical. Because last year there was a spill from one of the industries upriver from us, and we were advised that we couldn't even go onto the water. And so not being able to be out there and being able to do the ceremonies that I do, thinking about how that has affected me, but not just me, how that is affecting all the animals, because all of the birds left. There was no birds left along the shore. This year, they've finally come back. So thinking about, that whole, me seeing that crane that comes back every single year, seeing that heron that comes back every single year, and having those relationships with them. So how thinking about how all of this contamination in the waters, and how does that affect our health as Anishinaabe peoples?
Yeah, like you say, it's a holistic when it comes to the natural world, but it's also the human world or spirituality or physical. So yeah, I really love that approach that you have, looking at a thing as a whole and not as separate things. And when you're bridging the academia knowledge and traditional knowledge, how do you explain to people the work that you do? Like maybe like a young person when they come in and they're like, "Hey, how do you tend to bridge those two viewpoints that sometimes can be opposite of each other?"
A couple of the classes I teach one of the first classes I teach is Introduction to Indigenous Science and Practice. And I actually have them read a book, and it's an older book, but it's by Greg Kakagi, and it's called Native Science, Interdependence, and Interrelatedness, and I think it's from the early 2000s or that he wrote this book. So, and then, and I introduced the terminology to them because it's really complicated. When Christopher Columbus was lost and he landed on the shores here, he thought he was in India, so he called us Indians. And so that stuck for a really long time. And then at the United Nations, they decided that, people were having conversations and they decided that, well, no, we shouldn't be called Indians because that's not who we were, because Christopher Columbus was lost. So then they decided to call us Aboriginal. And then after Aboriginal, they decided to call us Indigenous. And in Canada, a lot of communities call themselves First Nations when they're actually part of a bigger nation. So my community, Garden River, the sign says Garden River First Nation, but we're not a nation on our own. We're part of a bigger nation like the Anishinaabe Nation. And so explaining to people the terminology and how that has changed, but what has never changed is how we actually view the world. And how we view the world as our relatives, as our teachers, and that they are the firstborn, we are the lastborn, and so they have knowledge that they share with us, and we rely on them. They do not rely on us. Explaining that if we took a look around in the world and we took all of the trees off of the planet, we would all die. If we took all of the water off of the planet, we would all die. But if we took all the humans off the planet would be totally fine. So trying to flip that narrative for people to understand that we are part of the cycle, we're not above it, we're not outside of it, that we're part of it, and that the earth doesn't need us, we need the earth. That's the premise of how I approach teaching the course. And the students, and we always go outside. I try not to sit inside these brick buildings and explain to them, well, we're lucky at the University of Guelph because we have what's called an arboretum, and it's a really huge natural space. And so we go outside to the arboretum and walk around, and we have these types of discussions so that they can actually feel it and see it and breathe it and smell it, and not just hear me sitting at a desk just, blabbing away.
That's so awesome. I would love to take a class with you. I feel like you'd be a good teacher and then be there in a beautiful campus and learning so much. And like you said, we are the ones that we're trying to save at the end of the day, because the planet is going to be fine. But people don't understand that when we say to save the planet, we're talking about saving the people. Because like you say, the planet is going to be okay. And I find the book that you recommended very interesting, because we are just opening our bookshop for the Indigenous Earth. It's a way that people can go online and they can purchase his books. And not only that's going to give a little bit of a donation to our podcast, but also is going to help independent books sellers that are also native. So I'm definitely going to include that book into the list. So people want to check it out. They want to learn more. They can go on the bookshop.org on the link in the descriptions, and they can purchase that book and support the podcast, Indigenous authors, and Indigenous bookstores. And is there any other book that you recommend on your class?
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of them. There's also Braiding Sweetgrass. I'm sure everybody has heard of that book by Robin Kimmerer. It's she's such a great author. She's Potawatomi, and she's such a great author. She's a really good storyteller. So yeah, I recommend her book. Of course, there's Our Knowledge is Not Primitive is another book by Wendy McCoon's and I take pieces of chapters out of books that John Borrells has written, pieces of chapters out of books that Michael Ash and John Burroughs. It's called Resurgence and Reconciliation, that they have edited. So there's different authors inside the book. Traditional Ecological Knowledge is another book where I use different authors because, again, inside that book is all different authors from all over the place that have contributed to that. So because I try to get the students to understand that all over these lands, no matter where we are on the planet, there were Indigenous peoples. And if they trace their lineage far enough back to wherever they come from, they too might be Indigenous. They won't be Indigenous to these lands, but they'll be Indigenous to someplace else. And I also talk to them about that respect and that responsibility that we have not to take somebody else's stuff and to claim it as your own, and to uplift those voices, that the people that have those voices. So the Indigenous peoples, the Anishinaabe peoples, the Haudenosaunee peoples. And one of the things I get them to do is to actually try to trace their lineage on where they come from. So unless they're Indigenous to these lands, they've all come from all over the world. And when we do that as an exercise, one of the things I get them to do is to, if it was just their grandparents, they're the second generation or third generation here, or if they're the first generation, to try and talk to their parents or their grandparents to find out why they're here. Because most of the people that are here, that have come to Turtle Island, which is North America, have been displaced from their own lands. Most of them have not stood up and volunteered and say, hey, I'll leave all my belongings, all my ancestors, all my family behind, and I will go to North America. Most of them have been displaced through war, through famine, all kinds of different reasons as to why they're here. And so understanding and having that compassion for one another, that, we have so much in common when we take away the layers that we have, and that we are all human. We all need land to survive on. We all need water to survive on. And many, many people have been displaced, so that intergenerational trauma that their grandparents and their parents, and most of them say that their parents and grandparents will not talk about it. And it's like, because they've been through so much trauma, they don't want to talk about that, and they definitely don't want to put that trauma on the next generation, on their children or their grandchildren. So explaining these things to them and having them understand, and I think that just gives us more respect for any human that we meet on the street. That, they've come from someplace, and they most likely have been displaced from someplace. And it's I think that's part of getting them to understand that when they come to these lands, then they have a responsibility, because these lands are what have sustained the Indigenous peoples here for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. So what is your responsibility when you've been displaced from your lands and you've lost that responsibility to your lands, and now you're on North America? What is your responsibility to these lands? And so explaining and having these types of exercises in the class, I think, really helps them understand that we all have a responsibility to the land. It's not just Indigenous peoples that are going to fix everything. Like everybody, let's just go talk to the Indigenous peoples. Well, no, we're not. It's not up to us. It's up to you also. It's up to everybody to step up to the plate and start to consciously think about what they're doing to the water, what they're purchasing, how often they're purchasing it, and where is the garbage going? It typically is not going in their own backyard. It's going in my backyard. It's going in an Indigenous community's backyard. And so to have these types of hard conversations to get people to be more aware of what their actions are and what they're doing, I think will really increase their understandings, and then help them also be responsible, especially when we think about the water, right? We all have a water story. And we all come from water. no matter what color our eyes are, our hair is, our skin is, whether we have teeth or no teeth or whatever, we all sat inside that water lodge and came through that channel into this world. Well, okay, not everybody comes through the channel. There's different ways people are birthed, but we all sat in that water lodge is the whole main point. So we have that in common also. And I think when we try to look at the commonalities, and then when we talk about, okay, somebody might be this type of religion and somebody else might be this type of religion, and then I do Anishinaabe ceremony. And without interfering with one another, can we all agree that we need water? And everybody's like, yes. Okay, then let's think about how we can bring the different knowledge systems together and fix the problems that we as humans have created. Because you don't see the deer or the fish or the birds trying to dig up diamonds to so that they can say, hey, you want to marry me? And here's a piece of rock that's shiny. They don't do that. Only humans do that. And we've been brainwashed to think that we have to do that in order for it to be authentic. So there's all of these types of things that I think are really helpful for all people to begin to understand so that we can all be better humans and be more responsible to the lands that we're on, no matter where we are.
Be better humans. This is an amazing conversation, and you dropped so many truth flowers. So many deep knowledge. So I really appreciate it. And what a beautiful exercise that you have them do to trace back their ancestors. And like you said, many of us, we have been displaced and we have that generational trauma that carries in our DNA, in our body. And the work that we have to do to heal ourselves is really about healing our DNA. So that way we can improve our health and live longer, but also our offsprings can live longer, because there's a lot of damage that is done through those traumatic experiences of displacement, as you have shared. And listening to those type of indigenous knowledge, I think, is so important, because indigenous people being in the land for so long and they have pay attention to the animals, to the seasons, to that knowledge, and stay and being able to have that. And a lot of people that get displaced, they have lost that knowledge in their travels. So it's really good to be able to come back to those human values of understanding, of respect for each other. So thank you so much.
Yeah, I wanted to mention there's two. There's a series on APTN, and it's called The Americas Before Christopher Columbus. And I think there's like 10 episodes that are about an hour long. And it talks about the knowledges of all of the different plants, the irrigation system, so farming, harvesting, the foods that were produced, and how all of these have contributed to the world. Because one of the examples I always give the students is that potato. Everybody thinks the Irish discovered or made the potato, and it's like, no, that actually comes from the Americas. And so getting people to they just had a war over it, but just getting people to understand that this is when people say, oh, traditional knowledge, like, what is that? And people think it's like hocus pocus or stuff. And it's like, no, it's actually practical applications that can be used even today and are still being used today. Look at the canoe. Look at snowshoes. Look at maple syrup. That was our knowledge, and Canada just took it and put a stamp on it and then called it theirs. And never do they acknowledge that knowledge from maple syrup ever came from us. So there's so many things that we have contributed to everyday society that are just erased. It's almost like they're trying to erase us. So I always recommend to people to do a little bit of their own homework. There are so many different types of apps that you can look at. Besides just Google, there are so many other types of search engines out there that will give you information. And in this day and age, nearly everybody has internet and a cell phone. So there is almost no reason for not knowing something, especially from the place that you live. So no matter where you live, finding out who is there, what was their knowledge, what was their language, what did they do to contribute and sustain the lands, and how can we support what they did in uplifting their voices. So that's one series I get the students to watch. They have to pick one or two episodes and then give a reflection on it. But there's also another book. It's called Water Voices from Around the World. And in that book, there are letters from peoples all over the world about water. And it's absolutely, I think it's a 2001 book. And it's a big book. Like, it's like the size of a letter, right? 8 by 8.5 by 11, whatever size those sheets of paper are. And there's so many images in there. And one of the things is that from all over the world, the people are talking about how important water is, how sacred water is, how we all need to protect water. But they also talk about some of their ceremonies that they do for water. And so and understanding that, Josephine Mandamin always said, there's no wrong way to make an offering to the water. There is no wrong way to pray to the water. Everybody has that. It doesn't have to be, I'm going to go hang out with the, the Haudenosaunee, the Mohawk people, and I'm going to learn their ways, and then I'm going to do that. That's not mine to take. There is, if we go back and we trace that lineage and find out who our ancestors were and which lands they came from, they too would have ceremonies and offerings for those waters. So that's another reason why I get them to do that. And then I bring my book to class, and because it's not a required reading, I bring the book to class, and they all have an opportunity to look at some of the letters from wherever they may be from.
Thank you so much, Professor. This is great homework for all of us to have and to learn. And I imagine that people listening to this podcast, they're interested in Indigenous knowledge. But like the professor's saying, it's really up to us to do a little bit of homework, because I feel like sometimes we say, hey, we are ready to learn, teach me, but we haven't done the work to get to that place where we have to learn. We have to really be on a place of understanding of history, of things that have happened to be able to learn, because we have to come in with a little bit of knowledge to learn. And I really appreciate that. And you kind of mentioned maple syrup, and I'm sorry, but that's my weakness. I love maple syrup. So you're saying that, Native people had the maple syrup. So is there a particular one that you have, that you like, that you've seen done by Native people?
Karuga, and all of those Six Nation peoples. We have stories about how that came to us. But if you think about it practically, we wouldn't have made bottles and bottles and bottles of maple syrup, because how would we have toted that around? Fill up our canoe and we'd sink. So we made maple sugar, and we made maple candy and things that we could stuff inside a bag and carry that around. Maple syrup is just one step in the process that we used. But when we showed, even when you drink, even when you first tap that tree and you do the ceremony for the tree, and then you tap the tree and you take that first sip of that sugar water, it's just absolutely refreshing. And now you can buy that in the store, and they call it sapsucker, and they've carbonated it and added lime or lemon or mango, whatever kind of flavors to it. So even that has been commercialized, just like the maple syrup has been commercialized. I tap the trees in and around my house, but I tap them just so that I get enough for me and my family. I don't produce it to sell it or to trade with it. I keep a lot of the sugar water inside. I'll put them inside containers and put them in the freezer, and then I bring them to ceremony and we make tea, or I'll add them to soup or whatever, because it just sweetens everything right up. But I found when we were doing our maple syrup, we tapped trees that were further down by my cousins. And there was a couple maple trees that were in a birch stand. And then the trees that we tapped close to my house are kind of in a evergreen stand. So there's pines and spruce all over the place. And the color of the sap was different from one area to another area. And just thinking about, what the pine trees their leaves are very acidic. They put a lot of acid into the soil. So certain plants can only grow in that type of soil. And then thinking about where we tapped a couple of years ago down by my cousins, and it was a birch stand, and how the birch trees are different than the pine trees. But they're all living together. And I remember hearing one elder talking about how the trees have everything has so much to teach us. But if you sit down and you look at the trees, you never see a birch tree telling a pine tree to get out of the bush. They learned how to coexist, even though they're so different, and they have so many different gifts that they offer. They have different soils that they like, but they still manage to coexist and live side by side. And I remember him telling that story about, just those sorts of things on what the world outside, the natural world, has to teach us. But yeah, I hope that I'm just starting to ramble on now about how amazing trees are because, so maple syrup, everybody loves it. Everybody loves it.
Everybody loves it. Yeah, for sure. No, thank you so much for sharing that interesting story about the trees. It kind of makes me think about bees and the honey that they produce, and it depends on the flowers they have around it. Here in Florida, we have a mangrove honey that is amazing. It's honey that is produced with the flowers from the mangroves. And it has a little bit of like a salty kind of taste to it because of the salt water or brackish water. That is phenomenal. And it's so interesting how, everything is connected with everything around, the flavors of the fruits, the maple syrup, the honey is really related to everything. And it kind of almost brings it back to that work that you're doing of helping the environment against this pesticide that is being planted. Because if we can say that the maple syrup tastes different because of the trees that are around it, if we can say that the honey tastes different because of the flowers that are around it, what are this poison being put in the ground affecting everything else? The plants, the flowers, the bees, the people. So I want to say thank you so much for doing the important work to really bring that indigenous knowledge into that framework and bringing everything together.
Thank you so much, Professor Sue, for all your wisdom and all you're doing for protecting our water. If you want to check out our bookshop, check out the links. As my friend says, we haven't sold one empanada there yet. Be the first one to support our podcast, Indigenous authors, and Indigenous bookstores. And do the homework. Trace your lineage. Learn about local Indigenous people in your area. Remember that we're not trying to save the planet. We're learning to be better humans. And it's not only for Indigenous people to be protecting the planet. It's for all of us. Thank you so much for being part of our community. Agoje.
Yeah.